Hi guys, it's Jen. So I read the book Invent to Learn: Making Tinkering and Engineering in the Classroom. This was written by Sylvia Leibo Martinez and Dr. Gary Stager. So Sylvia Martinez brings her experience from working in the highly innovative areas of aerospace engineering, educational software, and video gaming to the classroom with ideas on how to make STEM education more inclusive, effective, and engaging, and the research behind it. And then Dr. Gary Stager is a journalist, teacher, educator, consultant, professor, and school STEM director. He is considered one of the leading experts on computer programming, robotics, and project based learning. He brings his passion paired with his training as an elementary school teacher to help teachers bring project based learning in all areas to the classroom. So, as you can see, both of these two are pretty much experts in their field, which was really interesting once I read that before reading the book. So, I was excited. I wasn't sure about reading this book. It seemed like there was a lot of pages, so I was kind of nervous, but it was free on Amazon Kindle Unlimited, so that was a positive. So the basic thesis behind the book and the idea that they're trying to convey is that children should engage in tinkering and making because they are powerful ways to learn. So through our credential program, we've obviously learned that everybody learns a little bit differently, but this is one way in which people learn almost universally is by playing with things and figuring out why things are the way they are. So this was kind of interesting to see. So the way that they describe making is that it's about the active role construction plays in learning. The maker has a product in mind when working with tools and materials. They explain the IKEA effect. So people who make things value their creations, even if they're flawed creations, more than the same thing that was created perfectly by experts. So they reference IKEA because you kind of feel good when you're finished making that IKEA table. You probably could have gone and bought one for another $50. But when you put together your IKEA table, even if you have 18 screws left over like I do, you feel proud of yourself. So that's what they were talking about with that. Tinkering is a mindset, a playful way to approach and solve problems through direct experience, experimentation, and discovery. And then engineering extracts principles from direct experience. It builds a bridge between intuition and the formal aspects of science by being able to better explain, measure, and predict the world around us. So when we encourage children to build with sand, blocks, paint, glue, all of that stuff, we're simply asking them to take what they know about science and apply it to the real world. So it's really hands-on learning, and this is something children have been doing for ages and ages before people wrote books or made websites or had maker spaces. So in the current classroom climate, it's really based on instructionism. So basically that means that learning is a direct result of having been taught something. So when we are learning facts, we see this in our credential program in direct instruction, fact memorization, and then the way textbooks are constructed. And what we really want to get close to is constructionism. So this is where learning results from experience and an understanding is constructed inside the head of a student, often in a social context. So this is very child-centered, very open-ended, and then it's project and inquiry based. So this is where we want to be. So there are several design models that they explained. They're all very much like instructional design models, like the ADDIE model, in a circular fashion. But basically, you determine your objectives, you decide what you're going to make, you design it, you develop it, test it, take in feedback, and then go back around the circle again to improve what you've made. So it was interesting because the two models that they showed are very, very similar to how kindergartners learn and play. They imagine, then they create something, they play with it, they share it with friends, then they reflect on that learning and sharing, and then come back and start over again. So it was interesting how that all tied to kindergarten. The authors talk about the initials TMI. So in classrooms today, we have too much instruction, too many interruptions, and too much intervention. So we need to give students the chance to think, so figure out things, make things, play around with them, build them, tinker with them, and then improve on what they've made. So give them a chance to go back to the drawing board based on feedback. Um, they also referred to several game changers in the game of makerspaces. So Lego Education has some really cool robotics kits. Raspberry Pi and Arduino were two different computer small sized microcontrollers. Makey Makey was really interesting. Scratch is a computer programming language for kids I've seen used. It's really interesting. They also give tips on how to create a makerspace. So what materials? Basically anything you can get your hands on. Tools, lumber, cardboard, old phones, craft supplies, computers, cameras, electronic parts, anything that kids can play with, manipulate, make something different with. The teacher expectations I loved because they said, help her get out of the way. So basically, if you don't try and be their guru, just be their guide. Less us, more them, basically for teachers. Student expectations obviously are safety and responsibility, sharing resources, open-mindedness, perseverance, and leadership. And then how to develop a maker day. So it's just a way to showcase student work and then show your community how your students are learning by doing. So here is my review of the book. So it does a great job at providing the information about why project-based learning, making, tinkering, and engineering are important in the classroom. So there's a ton of information on that. They do a great job about telling us how to turn our school, classroom, or educational space into a safe space for making, playing, engineering, all that stuff. The downfall. This book was really hard to get through. The research behind the project-based learning was front-loaded, so the first chapter was super long and dense about why this is, what all the research behind it, and quotes from the research, which was really hard to get through. The middle of the book, although they gave really specific examples of products to use, they were really, really specific on how they worked and all the ins and outs of the products, and which was hard because new versions of programs are always coming out. So I think it could have said, hey, go check this one out, here's a link to it, because even with the newer version of the book, there were several products after they had spent pages dedicated to them that had footnotes and said they were no longer available. So that was kind of frustrating after you go through that, say, oh, that sounds really good, and then there's a footnote that says it's no longer available. So I would have a really hard time recommending the entire book to anybody, but I could definitely recommend a few chapters because they were really interesting, and there were some chapters that I was like, oh, I don't want to put this down. But then there were some was like, oh my gosh, is this almost over? Like skip through some of the stuff because it was really dense and hard to get through. I wish that the authors had trusted themselves as experts, and I would have trusted them as experts as well, instead of having to front load all the expert knowledge that they did. And it has a place, obviously, but maybe not in the front of the book because it made it really hard to get into. Maybe a little bit of the theories and research based on it, and then put the rest of the research in the back, because it made it really hard to, like I said, get into. It was really dense. So otherwise, some of the chapters were so good and so helpful, and some of them were just really dense. And I mean, I had to skip through some of the stuff because I didn't even understand what it was talking about, like some of the computer programming, really specific stuff in there. So otherwise, I would recommend definitely some chapters as a starting off point in making a makerspace in your school. I hope you enjoyed my review. Thanks.